After more than a week of fighting, Russia's progress seems to have stalled. All over the news, we hear of stuck military convoys, videos of destroyed Russian vehicles, and many seemingly just abandoned after running out of fuel. And all this is just a few dozen kilometers from their own country. They've also, at the time of writing this, failed to take some key cities, like Kharkiv, which is only 40 kilometers from the border. So, what is the reason? Is it that Russia is really screwing up this bad, with endless logistical problems, low troop morale, and poor planning? Or maybe those convoys aren't really stuck, but using restraint to minimize civilian casualties. And then the images of abandoned and destroyed vehicles are the exception. And it is true that there's been many misidentified posts claiming that a tank or a vehicle is Russian when really it's Ukrainian. Or maybe something else is going on. But first, real quick, our sponsor, CuriosityStream. CuriosityStream is basically Netflix for nerds, perfect for people like me. They have thousands of documentaries and nonfiction titles from some of the world's best filmmakers, including exclusive originals. And they have a wide range of topics, including science, nature, history, technology, music, and sports. And always adding new shows every week. It's also available pretty much everywhere, whether your phone, Roku, Xbox One, smart TVs, Chromecast, Amazon Fire and Kindle, and Apple TV. You can even download videos to watch them later when you don't have service. So, no matter where you are, you can always watch. Like here, I started to get into a documentary on algorithms, something I might never need to know how to do, but still interesting nonetheless. So go now to curiositystream.com/covert, and with promo code COVERT, you'll get 25% off, which comes out to just $14.99 a year. Basically, for the same price that most streaming services charge you every month, you'll get a full year of CuriosityStream. So go check it out. You'll save some money while getting content that truly piques your interests. Again, CuriosityStream. In many ways, the invasion started out as expected. Strikes on Ukrainians' air defenses, air bases, and command and control centers with long-range strike weapons like cruise and ballistic missiles. Also, cyber attacks. But right away, things did not seem to be going as planned for Russia. Cyber attacks have seemed to be extremely limited in their effectiveness, with no widespread internet outages, cell phone reception mostly working, and the Ukrainian government seemingly still being able to communicate. Also, the Ukrainian Air Force and air defenses survived to some extent and are still fighting. Russia even, for some strange reason, failed to target and destroy things like that Bayraktar combat drone on the ground. These should have been high-value targets to destroy at the outset. As a result, we've seen that Bayraktar attacking and destroying numerous Russian vehicles. One explanation possible as to why Russia, with arguably the world's best short-range air defense systems, have failed to shoot them down is their small size, and that they're made mostly of carbon fiber and other composite materials, which does, at least in theory, make them harder to see on radar. But Russia's failure to neutralize Ukraine's military in the opening strikes could be explained in a few different ways. Either they did not have, or did not want to commit enough precision-guided weapons to the fight, or it's also possible that Russia was really expecting Ukraine to quickly collapse, and therefore had no need to fully go after and destroy Ukraine's air force and air defenses. Russia does have some extremely capable weapons, such as the Iskander-M ballistic and Iskander-K cruise missiles. The problem is that they don't have infinite numbers of them. This is true for every military. We often like to talk about and focus on the most advanced, newest tank that somebody has, or aircraft that another country has, but the majority of their forces still consist of older equipment, and that's because the latest hasn't been mass-produced and fully integrated yet. But there does seem to be some evidence for the fact that Russia did expect a quicker end to the war. Soon after the opening strike, the Russian VDV landed troops at Hostomel Airport just outside of Kyiv, which was deep behind enemy lines for them. Without any support, these forces were quickly driven off, but it does imply that Russia did think they had a good chance of even seizing ground nearby the capital without any backup on the very first day. Next has been the destroyed, abandoned, and stuck vehicles we've seen. We've seen dozens and dozens of tanks, air defenses like Pantsir and Tunguska, and other fighting vehicles and trucks destroyed or just abandoned. But it's also important to keep it in context. Russia has deployed several thousand vehicles. Again, there's also been many misidentified, destroyed Ukrainian vehicles as Russian, but still, we've seen many abandoned in seemingly perfectly working order, running out of fuel, or just getting stuck in the mud. Thawing out ground is likely responsible for some of these issues, and as it continues to get warmer, will only get worse. In fact, there's even a name for that, Rasputitsa. It happens twice a year, in the autumn with heavy rains, and then again in the spring when the snow melts, which is beginning now. It's historically been a major difficulty for any advancing military forces, like the Germans in World War II moving on Moscow, Napoleon in 1812, and even going back further to the Mongol invasion of Russia 800 years ago. So, while Russia is still very familiar with this, it's still a challenge with tanks and vehicles weighing a dozen or more tons. And it's one of the reasons why Russia has kept mostly to paved roads. But the problem with that is, if the vehicle in front is hit or breaks down, the entire rest of the convoy has to wait until it's moved. This can create a major bottleneck, as there's not very many other roads to take. And all that time idling, waiting to move, can use up a lot of supplies, like fuel or even food for the crews, so you have to continually be resupplying them. And again, we've seen some major logistical problems for Russian forces. And these here are some of the most overlooked aspects of war. We often think, well, Russia has many more and more capable tanks, so they should win, right? But in war, those tanks have to be backed up by artillery, other armored fighting vehicles, air defense, often air support from aircraft as well, and all the logistics bringing food, fuel, ammo, spare parts, and much more. And all this has to be working perfectly in sync to operate at its most effective, which is extremely difficult to do. And from what we've seen, Russia is struggling with this. We've seen Russian BTGs, or battalion tactical groups, mostly splinter up into ad hoc forces trying to advance. There's also been a lot of interesting insight and analysis into Russia's maintenance habits, or lack of them. For example, here discussing Russia's apparently not turning over and moving vehicles regularly before the invasion, which could lead to the sun hitting the tires constantly on one side, making the rubber more brittle and rotted, leading to the images we see here with flat tires. Also, apparently using cheaper and less quality controlled Chinese tires. Like logistics, this is another thing that's often overlooked, but also a highly important factor in having an effective military force. Another interesting note is the lack of large-scale use of the Russian Air Force. They have some of the most capable aircraft in the world, but we have not seen them taking part in numbers. There's a few possible reasons that could explain this. Russia's failure to fully destroy Ukraine's own air force and air defenses, so maybe they don't want to risk being shot down. And they also lack the large numbers of precision-guided weaponry and targeting pods that we see the US use. Another factor overall for the invasion is possibly lower morale in Russian troops than expected, along with their leadership not informing them of their mission as they attempted to keep the invasion plan and date secret. This also gave them less time to prepare their ground forces and air force. But it also needs to be noted that Russia does seem to be practicing at least some form of restraint, which shouldn't be any surprise. Whether they plan to annex the country or simply set up a pro-Russian government, which is more likely, they do not want endless, large-scale protests and unrest, which could end up just overthrowing any new government they set up in the same way that happened back in 2014. And also, Russian advances have hinted that that is their plan, to try to limit any civilian pushback as much as possible. It appears Russia has been attempting to encircle cities, such as Kyiv, in hopes they can force it to surrender to avoid the extremely destructive and deadly urban combat going street by street. Also, how they're going to handle civilians there when they do capture these cities is another big question. It takes a lot of restraint and some good training to be able to peacefully deal with angry and frustrated civilians, something that many of these Russian conscripts almost certainly are not taught. It could become a real delicate situation, as acting too weakly or responding too strongly with force will only further escalate tensions. Also, both Ukrainians' military and civilian resistance has been much higher than almost everyone expected. US intelligence, who to their credit did predict ahead of time the Russian invasion, then they also predicted that Putin had given the orders to invade, then accurately predicted that the invasion would start within 48 hours. They reportedly believed initially that Kyiv would fall in the first 96 hours of the war, something that obviously didn't happen. We've seen a pretty effective media campaign by Ukraine's president to rile up support both at home and abroad, and we've even seen Ukrainian citizens blocking roads to stop Russian forces from advancing. Also, many images and videos of destroyed Russian VDV vehicles that had entered the Ukrainian cities. So, all this has really slowed down the invasion. But Russia is still advancing. They are still gaining ground, capturing towns and cities, and surrounding others. So, while there does appear to be some real problems and setbacks, it still seems pretty certain that Russia will win in the end. But likely, the next big phase of the war, which can really determine the timeline and outcome, will be Russian forces seizing key cities, again like Kyiv. It seems that's where Ukrainian forces have fell back to defend, instead of staying on the open countryside where they knew they stood little chance. So, we will soon find out, unfortunately.